Is Reebok on the verge of relevancy once again in the sneaker community? We're going to get into that this week on Fire Footwear. Welcome back to Fire Footwear, everybody. As always, this is your host, Matt Frates. You can call me Matty Ice if you'd like. I am just happy that you are here, so call me whatever you want. I just want to welcome everybody back to another episode this week. We're going to get into relevancy in the sneaker game. And what do I mean by that? Well, if you think about the last time that we spoke about Atmos USA closing its doors. But really, this is a story about Foot Locker and its relevancy or its place in the sneaker community today. In the news recently, Reebok, which is a company that many of you feel a certain way about, and really, that feeling is dependent on how old you are, much like Foot Locker. But Reebok announced that they had new president and vice president of their basketball shoe division. And who were those people? Shaquille O'Neal was president and Allen Iverson was named vice president. For many of you, if I say the name Reebok, you have a certain feeling. And like I said before, that feeling is very much predicated on how old you are. Much like we talked about with Foot Locker, if you were younger, like I was when Foot Locker was in its heyday, you remember it a certain way. You remember it differently than the way that it is today. Many people today, if you're newer to the sneaker game or you're younger in the sneaker game, you know Foot Locker as one of the quote-unquote foot sites, and that's where people have been able to get access to shoes. But like we talked about last week, they are trying to find a new place in the sneaker game because they have been pushed out of the market in terms of the hype shoes that they are unable to get because Nike is just not giving them access. So fast forward this week to Reebok, where they make this announcement of Shaquille O'Neal and Allen Iverson. These are two people who have not played basketball in a very long time. But two people, I would say Shaq more than Allen Iverson, who do carry a little bit of weight in terms of celebrity and what they did on the basketball court in their time in the NBA. Reebok is desperately trying to redefine who they are. They are now well past the Adidas phase of their company life cycle, but Reebok has been around since, I believe, the late 1950s. Their heyday, in my opinion, was in the 80s and the early 90s, probably even until the mid-90s. And in basketball, their heyday was when the Reebok Pump came out. They've had a couple of silhouettes over the decades that have really stood the test of time, but other than that, Reebok really doesn't have a firm place in sneaker culture. Since that heyday, a lot has changed in the game. And since that heyday, a lot has changed in sneakers in general. And I think what has happened for them is they are desperately trying to find a new footing. And they're trying to find relevancy in this new sneaker game. If you go back and think about their heyday in basketball, when the Nike Pump was huge, the Shaq Attack was huge, the game was a lot different back then. Michael Jordan was still playing. Air Jordans were not what they are today. They were not a culture pop icon the way that they are. I think back then they did have a status because Michael Jordan was who he was, but 30 years later, the sneaker community is vastly different. Air Jordans are now seen as a lifestyle shoe, much less than they are seen as a basketball shoe. Sure, there are Air Jordans that come out every single year that are much more performance than lifestyle, but most people who are watching this or listening to this, when they hear Air Jordans, they think about the ones that they try to fit with all of the clothes that they have in their closet. And that is what has really changed. Reebok has not been a part of that culture, in my opinion. I think that they have made attempts over the years to become relevant, to give us retro releases of shoes. And you all know that I'm a sucker for the Reebok Pump. But overall, Reebok doesn't really have a standing the way that sneaker culture is today. Adidas, of course, is a very strong number two. During the Yeezy days, you could have said that they were number one. But I think you have Nike and Jordan Brand, you have Adidas, and then there is sort of a major precipitous fall off, at least in my opinion, of what happens in sneaker culture with all these companies. And I think Reebok is looking at the landscape, and they're seeing other companies rise to the occasion. They're seeing your New Balances, and even to the point of basketball, they are seeing now Skechers get into the game. Collaborations with Snoop Dogg, and now they have just signed Joel Embiid to be a player ambassador for them. What that means for their sneaker sales, I don't know. But in today's market, and I'm talking about the entirety of the economy in the United States and hell, worldwide, the more clicks that you can garner, the more successful that you are going to be. How do you do that? You have to get popular people as a part of your brand. And so Nike already has this because of Jordan Brand and its established lineage and obviously everything that comes with it. Nike doesn't really have to do a whole lot. Jordan Brand doesn't have to do a whole lot. Adidas really doesn't have to do a lot either in the basketball world. They have had a litany of successful sneaker releases as it relates to player edition shoes. But really, the Adidas ones are not lifestyle shoes. Many of them aren't, at least in my opinion. I've not seen many Derrick Roses. I've not seen many Dames. I've not seen many Hardens worn out there. But they are very, very popular in the basketball world, and I'm talking about functional basketball. And so Reebok is trying to capitalize on everything that is happening with social media and how we shop for things. And they have said to themselves, bringing on basketball players to be part of the executive leadership going forward is what is going to make us relevant. And I think that that's where the real question lies. Will that actually happen? Will Shaq and AI, who are two, again, players who have not been relevant on the basketball court in many years, be able to attract people and athletes to this brand? Because really, all of the retro Reeboks don't really have a place in lifestyle sneakers. People are going to buy other silhouettes well before they ever buy a Reebok. And so I think the company's pivot is that we're going to try to focus on basketball. We're going to try to be a major player in the basketball space only. And I think that that is very, very smart because I don't think that they're going to be able to compete in the lifestyle realm. I just think that Adidas and Jordan Brand have too much of a stronghold there. So I think that this move is very, very good and it's very, very savvy. But again, the question becomes, what is it going to do? Well, right off the bat, Reebok makes a huge splash and Shaq is able to get Angel Reese of LSU to the brand. And I think that that's really awesome because Nike and Adidas, by extension, are now going after WNBA athletes and female athletes. And in the college world today, with NIL being rampant, and that is a very good thing for the athletes, the sneaker game is going to find its way to more and more young people playing college sports. And I think women's college basketball had a moment back in March or April, the national championship game pitting Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese against each other. Angel Reese coming out on top and being a national champion, that elevated her to a different status. She's going to play again at LSU. She's then going to be drafted into the WNBA, and she's going to be a figure that people recognize. And I think that it's very smart not only to get an athlete that people recognize, but also trying to get a different demographic to come to the table. All of this is a very good idea. But what is it going to mean for them long-term after this? Are they going to be able to get enough of the people that really move the needle to make themselves relevant? How do they do that? Well, they have to, again, focus solely on basketball, in my opinion. And I think they need to stay away from trying to be relevant in the sneaker community that we all know here and try to be relevant on the basketball court. I understand that the question mids have a very nostalgic pull for a lot of people because of Allen Iverson, but people are not really wearing a ton of those styling it with their fits. They may be wearing them on the basketball court. The Nike pumps, the same thing. The Shaq attacks, the same thing. So I think what they need to do is get the athletes that move the needle, that people are going to feel inclined to buy because they see them as somebody that they look up to or they see somebody that is influential to them. But they also need to hit a home run with the shoes themselves. The technology has to be up to date. They have to look good on the court, obviously. And they have to be able to get into this market space that they haven't been able to be relevant in quite a while. The world has changed very drastically because Reebok now cannot just go back to what its 80s mantra was and be part of the fitness revolution. Fitness is already here. All of those other shoes have already taken over the market. At this point, with everybody's fitness journey, you know what your brand is. You're either a Nike person, you're an Asics person, you're an Under Armour person, whatever. You've already decided that. So Reebok is not going to be able to somehow steal all of these people away unless they somehow get the shoes to be amazing. And I think that they can do it. I think that Shaq and AI are not there to revolutionize sneakers in terms of the technology. What they are there to do is exactly what guys like Magic Johnson were trying to do with the LA Lakers. They're trying to get the shiny pieces to come to the brand, to elevate it so that when the shoes come down the pipeline and are great, they have somebody to sell it, somebody to be an ambassador. I think it would actually be really neat to see Reebok back in the forefront of popularity for basketball shoes, because the more choices that we have as consumers, the better. A lot of people will tell you that the Air Jordans that come out aren't really the best basketball shoes going, but a lot of NBA athletes wear them, and a lot of people want to get a player edition Jordan. What Reebok is trying to do is get players, not just basketball players in the NBA, WNBA players and college players alike, to want to hoop in a Reebok. And if they do that, they're going to get a lot of young people who are also going to want to hoop into it. And now, the release of the week. Release of the week, where I like to highlight a shoe that has caught my eye that I think you should know about. It's not always hype. Rarely is it hype, but it's just something that I want you to know about so that if you want to get it for your collection, you can go ahead and do so. If I've never talked about it on this show, I have a love affair with the city of Chicago. Going back to 2012 was when I ran my first marathon. And the first marathon that I ever ran was Chicago. The Chicago Marathon is one of the biggest marathons in the world, and I chose that to be my debut in the marathon scene. Why is that significant? Well, I almost had a heart attack when I was 29 years old. I then worked my way to losing 100 pounds and become a marathon runner. And while I'm in a different space in my life in that journey, the city of Chicago and what I accomplished there will always have a space in my heart, and I will always look at it fondly. And so that is why the Air Max 186 Chicago that is coming out is right up my alley. It actually kind of reminds me of the Londons. You know those Air Maxes that came out a handful of years ago, basically reminiscent of what the weather is like in London. Now you have to pay like $800 if you want to get them in my size. So I think these Chicago Air Maxes are almost like a little brother to those. If you don't have a pair of those and you want them, this is really a great shoe for you. It's gray, it's got the blue, there's knots to Chicago on it. I just really like it. And it's going to come out in a pack. I think there's an Air Force One that's going to come out with it too. But I just love these. I would like to have these for my collection for the nostalgia value and for the fact that it is a fire shoe. So if you're in the market for some Air Maxes and you, like me, love the city of Chicago, this shoe is for you. So what do you think about what Reebok is doing? Do you think that Shaq and AI can revive the brand to become a major player, a top 3 player in the basketball market? Let me know. Reach out to the show on Instagram. @FireFootwearPod is the handle to do that. On TikTok, @FireFootwearPod is the handle to find me there. I like to post a lot of reels, things of that nature. You can find the show on Facebook if you're so inclined. Just search for Fire Footwear. If you're watching this on YouTube, you already know this, but if you're listening in the audio space, Fire Footwear, a sneaker channel, is where you will find the video version of this. And of course, my audio listeners, I love all of you. If you're listening on Apple and Spotify or whatever app it is that you use, please don't forget to hit like. Please don't forget to hit follow. And if you can and are able to, a rate will be super, super helpful. Last but not least, please support the Matty Ice Media Network for all the other podcasts that we have, mattyIcemedia.com. You can find this show and, of course, the other show that I'm on, Iceman and Coach. I hope this finds everybody well. I hope this finds everybody safe. And I will talk to you next time. This is Fire Footwear. The opinions and viewpoints expressed on Fire Footwear are those of Matt Frates and his guest, and not necessarily those of the Matty Ice Media Network. Fire Footwear is exclusively owned by Matt Frates and is brought to you by the Matty Ice Media Network.